Now, there was a wonderful voice voicing that piece that we heard before, Jane Luscombe, lovely broadcasting voice, former colleague at TV3. Now, I can tell you in the television industry, financial capability and retirement are very pressing issues at the moment, as you probably noticed. Retirement in television is just a phone call away. So, we're very interested in issues relating to financial capability in our industry. Now, joining me is Alfred Naro. We're going to be discussing behaviour change, concepts behind behaviour change. Alfred worked on the community initiatives, including the Tamaki Achievement Pathway, and I think that earned Alfred a Sir Peter Blake Emerging Leader Award, and he also worked on the Inspiring Communities Exchange Network, so he knows all about behaviour change. Now, first up, Alfred, the parenting courses that you ran, tell us a bit about those and who were they aimed at and what was the overall goal?
So the goal really was not just about running a course, but it was about facilitating change and change for people. So in fact, it was great, the warehouse distribution centre that was up on the slides just a moment ago is actually where the first sort of parenting program that we ran, and that's where Stephen Tyndall said, look, we'd been to Canada, looked at poverty reduction, looked at how systems and people change, and he said, look, just go out to the warehouse and how about you try and run a program on parenting? And I said to him, well, most Kiwi men don't like to be told what to do. I think most women would agree with that. But I said to him, do you trust me? And he said, well, yes, I do. And I said, well, I'll figure it out when I get there. So when I went there and had 250 men out in the yard in their smoko, and I said, good morning, morning. And I said, yeah, that's great. And I said, so what are you guys here for? And they said, oh, well, Stephen said, you're the expert on fathering, and so you're going to tell us how to be better dads. And I said, yeah. I said, I've got 4 kids of my own, also helped to raise 3 nieces, 2 grandchildren, but to be honest, even I struggle on the best of days. And they said, well, you're a useless expert, aren't you? And a bit of a Kiwi thing there going on. And I just said, yeah, well, or I could say that maybe there are no perfect dads. And maybe it's just the fact is that there's something that we can learn from each other. And then they said, well, what are we going to do? You know, we're here. And I said, yeah. And I said, well, why don't we write our own book on fathering? And one of the guys said, look, mate, I'm just a truck driver. That's all I do. I truck in and I truck out. Another guy said, buddy, I'm the forklift guy. So I come in, pick up the boxes and the pallets, put them on a truck, put them on a shelf. And another guy said, yeah, mate, you know how technical my day gets? I put down a pallet, I put on a box and another box, and I just bubble wrap it. And that's about as technical as my day gets. And I said, man, that's awesome. So why don't we write a book on fathering for the bubble wrap guy, for the forklift guy, and for the truck driver? And they said, what, who, us? And they said, yeah. So anyway, they sort of came round to it, and that's when it began. And so they began to share their stories.
Yeah. So what did you think was the benefit of them sharing their experiences rather than you guys telling them what to do?
Well, I think the thing is that when we think about behavioural change, we're in such a consumer society, and Diane talked about, you know, working for the evil side where you try to convince people about what happiness is and what they think they need for themselves and for their family and for their future, where actually the process is around actually helping people sort of think that they're the experts. And so rather than coming with 12 steps on how to change your life and your behaviour, it's a process of saying, well, actually maybe the answers and the solutions start with you first rather than with me. And so the idea of actually having a book was right outside of their comfort zone. It's around actually getting them to explore something that was quite different. And rather than saying, well, you're the expert to tell me what to do, which is that consumer model, I wanted to quickly transition to say, actually, maybe you are the expert. And my job is to facilitate that change process.
And did it change their behaviour?
Well, it's quite amazing because so we got the guys in and they sort of said, well, so where do we start? And I said to them, so the best Western that I've ever seen is Clint Eastwood. And you'd know that, Michael, the good, the bad and the ugly. And guys like Lee Van Cleef, who was the ugly guy. And I said, you know what that Western tells me is that it's a bit like life. There are good parts of life, there are bad parts, and then there's some really ugly parts. And I said, so that means we've all got a story to tell, so why don't we just share our stories? So all of a sudden, these guys began to sort of tell it as it was. And what emerged out of there, actually, then guys began to learn, actually, there are things from someone else's story that I can learn. a good example, one guy got up and said, hey, that's really cool, but I can't participate. And I said, why is that? And he said, because I never had a dad. So as the facilitator, you've got to have a little bag of tricks. And so I thought, I just read this book about a story about a guy called Chuck Norris. He was a guy, who tried to be a karate guy. I was more of a Bruce Lee fan. I think Pale's more a Chuck Norris fan. And anyway, Chuck Norris had his first baby and in the maternity ward, and he was holding his baby and he was crying. And his wife said, oh, honey, I know it's so emotional, our first baby. And he said, no, I'm crying because I realized that I never had a dad. And so I'm afraid. And she said, okay, well, give me the baby in a nice nurturing way. Now, now get out of the room and don't come back until you've figured it out, in a very wifely, nice, kind, sort of nurturing way. So anyway, so he goes out and he goes to the lunchroom, he gets a sheet of paper, and he writes down 1 to 10 down the paper. And he said, number 1, if I had a dad, what would I want him to do? And he wrote down, I'd want him to tell me that he loved me every day. Number 2, I'd want him to hug me every day. Number 3, and he just went down. And I told the guys a story, and I said, so what does Chuck's story teach us? It tells us and teaches us that it doesn't matter where your today is, it doesn't have to be your tomorrow. That we can all start, we can rewrite our script. And so that's the challenge. And with that, things just opened up. And all of a sudden, here were these guys that you saw there that just had, reflector jackets and heavy working boots and overalls. And all of a sudden, they became like sort of professors and psychologists. And I said, well, actually, this is what I think, And then they started telling their stories. All of a sudden, a whole new world emerged for them. And I mean, that's the power of change. That's the power of transformation.
And how did the families react?
Well, it was quite amazing because one part of the process, I decided to get them, all 250 of them, a disposable camera. Because a lot of them actually said to me, they've actually never really had photos with their kids. So I said, well, here you go, disposable camera, so, it'll be safe. Just go out there and get people to take photos of you with your children. And so they did. And then we brought the photos back. We sort of learned a lesson that we should have taught them how to teach people how to take photos because half of them were all over the place. But you know what? We got enough photos that we could put together into a book. And the power of that is that the photos reflected and became a mirror of their life. And they began to see themselves. One of them was one of the fathers, washing, the children, their baby. One of them was cooking. One of them was reading. And it became this mirror of truth and the reality. And actually, they weren't as bad as what they thought they were, but also to help them to see that maybe there are areas that they could change. And so their families became involved in this whole process. In fact, what was quite amazing is that, so we had the men, and then all the women, because believe it or not, there were women in that distribution centre, who turned around and said, what's going on here? All these men are getting excited and they're getting active and they're doing things and they're talking. And I said, oh, we're doing stuff on fathering. I said, oh, man, we're women. We can do it twice as better as them, And sure enough, we did another process and we wrote a book on, we got women to write their own book on mothering. So the transformation meant that these guys were not only transforming for themselves, but now they were engaging in their families. They were now having photos that they could put at home that reflected what they would like to see, which is about a caring sort of nature and an ability to care for their children.
And those behaviour changes, how do you link that to the concept of financial capability and drawing from that experience?
Well, it's quite interesting because we started at the warehouse talking about fathering and parenting, and now we're talking about financial literacy. I think the point is, when you're facilitating change, your end point does not have to be your starting point. You have to start where people are at. You can't just turn around and say, right, we're going to turn around and we're going to tell people, how to manage, their finances and so forth. Now, that may be the end point, and you've got to get there. So I believe in achieving outcomes, but that's not necessarily where you may need to start with. You've got to start with a common cause and a place in which people feel that they can begin to understand what change looks like for them. And small steps of becoming confident means that people then begin to say, okay, then I've got a pattern of changing my behaviour, my attitude. What else could I do? And the other thing I think that's important, Michael, is that you've got to cast a vision and a dream for people of a new reality. And when people, my grandmother used to say to me that if you focus, because believe it or not, I was a little bit sort of naughty when I was young.
Impossible.
And everyone used to say, oh, you know, you're useless, or you're always in trouble and things like that. But my grandmother always used to say to me, if you focus, what you focus on will grow. So if you keep focusing on the things that people talk about that are negative about you, then that's what will grow. But if you focus on your potential and that which is positive, then that's what will grow. So I think the thing is that when you are facilitating change, you've got to find the things that are positive in people's life. Here are people who didn't believe that they had the capability and ability to change or to even create something that could create change for themselves and others. A good example of that, when we finished the books and then went back, and one of the guys who was the truck driver, Albie, he said to me, well, here's the books, and he said, oh, how many can I have? And I said, well, how many do you want? And he goes, he said, 40? And I said, yeah, cool, here, 50. A month later, I came back and was in the smoko, and I was catching up with him, and I said to him, say, hey, how'd it go? You know, you got those books, and what'd you do? And he said, man, I had the boys on, and the bros were around, had the barbie going, had a few beers, and I threw the books on the table. And they said, what's this? And he said, it's my book on fathering. You know, so you turned the guy who was the truck driver who felt like he was a chump into a champion. And, you know, it's that sort of thing that I think is a process that when we facilitate. And you see, I really believe that education is a tool. And I agree with, you know, Elaine Kempson. Education on its own is not enough. You've got to have attitude. But in order to get that attitude so that education and attitude connect together, and that's the power for transformation.
Cook Island background, how would you describe that, and what did you learn, and the concepts of finances? What did it mean in your environment?
Well, you know, I was New Zealand born, but my grandmother was half Jewish. Maybe that explains part of it. So her name was Rita Goldstein Tapaki, and her father was Marcus Goldstein. It's not where I got the nose, by the way. That's from rugby. So, no, she. I contributed a lot to my grandmother. She just taught me simple values. You know, what you start, you know, you should finish. The effort you put in is what you'll get out. So she was teaching me investment that I didn't realise even at a young age. And so simple things like that I think are really important. Just a strong work ethic. And the things that are important, I think, when we're in a consumer age, I've sort of followed some of Stephen Covey's work around leadership, and he's talked about the transition of that where we're sort of more into sort of charisma rather than character. And I think there's a real challenge for us that we've got to continue to put character as an important focus. So it's around issues around trust, you know, your credibility, you know, you keep your promises, you keep your word. You know, if you fail, then you own up to it. You know, those sorts of things. I know coming from a politician, you guys may think that's a bit strange. Sorry, Minister. But I mean, those things I think are really important. So I remember just when I first started out in Parliament, and I was sitting next to Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Bill English. And I've been watching and observing him. I'd been to his office for a few things, and then after the budget in 2013, I'd said to him, I think I've figured you out. He sort of looked at me and I said, oh, yeah, you're trying to get ahead, are you? And I said, no, I think I've figured you out. And I said, I realised that finance is actually not about money. It's actually about people, and it's about relationships, and it's about behaviour. And I'd learnt those things because my grandmother taught me. I learnt those things because I saw my mother, who was a cleaner all her life, and yet she was able to pay off 2 mortgages, 4 cars, because my dad kept on wrecking them, you know, put 6 children, you know, through school. And yet the fact is that her ability to be focused and to have a vision, I think, has been part of the, you know, key principles for me.
Who do you think's responsible in our society broadly for teaching financial capability?
I think there are 2 parts to that. I believe that sometimes we need help from outside, but I also too think that there's also a need for change from the inside. So when I think about it in communities, to me, it's not just about top down or bottom up. I think actually it's side to side, working collectively together. The 2 things in facilitating change in communities, or even when I've worked with families, I'd often say to them, right, so here's all the people that are going to here to help you, but before we do that, you need to have your time together, and you need to shut the doors and close the curtains, and you need to ask yourself 2 questions. First of all, what are we going to be responsible for? What's ours to keep? What's ours to own? What's ours that we say, irrespective of what happens, that's ours to be responsible for. Then the second thing, you need to be able to say then, now what do we need help with? And I think then you become a bit more targeted, a bit more focused, but it means that you share the responsibility to be able to create change. And so to me, I think it's both. So it's, if I think about it, it's families, it's communities, it's schools, it's other community groups, but at the same time too, it's the role of like the commission, it's the role of government to play its part.
Can I throw you a curly one?
Go.
There's an ad that's been going for some years. I just saw it the other night. Stacey Jones promoting instant finance. So it's the idea of role models. Pine Tree Meads was promoting a finance company that went broke not that long ago. What do you think of the fact that these guys are doing these ads and the impact they have as role models? How important is it, this role model, and the impact on the thinking of people about finances?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one. I suppose people make their own choices. So those two individuals in particular, they've made the choice that obviously they've had a commercial transaction for them to promote, and promoting happens all the time. People do it with different sort of ads and different companies for different purposes. So I suppose the most important thing is that we need to promote local heroes. So some of the photos and pictures that you're seeing there, so that one there is in particular around the Te Papa Rugby Club. And they had, one of the guys had been at the warehouse and he'd sort of seen the work that we were doing, and he said, can you come and help us? And I said, okay, what's happening? He said, oh, maybe you can help us write a book on fathering, for our rugby club. And I said, for what purpose? And he said, well, we've got about 200 kids, but we've only got 5 coaches. We've got heaps of parents that are floating around, but they don't want to engage. They don't want to get involved. So anyway, I sat down in the changing room, in the club rooms, and we were talking, sort of thinking. And then I saw on the walls there were these Steinlager photos and posters. And there was the Jonah Lomu, there was the Christian Cullen, all these sort of heroes. And so I thought to myself, I said, hey, why don't we change these posters? And they said, well, what do you mean? Well, why don't we, instead of having Jonah Lomu and Christian Cullen, why don't we have you guys? And I said, who, us? And I said, yeah, you guys. And they said, well, how do we do that? And I said, well, I've got a good friend who's a photographer. Why don't we come in and take a snapshot of one day in the life of Te Papa Rugby Club? And we'll just sort of maybe create a mirror to see what does it really look like, from the outside looking in, and what do you look like? And so we did that. And we took these amazing photos. So some of the photos you see there that became posters. And Diane made the comment about attention span. So I got the photos, said, okay, guys, research shows us that men can only concentrate for no more than 5 minutes, not the 7 minutes. My research, I think I just made it up. But anyway, I said to the guys, probably a woman would say 2 minutes. But anyway, I said to the guys, so we've only got 5 minutes. Research says you can only concentrate 5 minutes. We've got about 8 posters. So now you're going to have to give us the captions to these posters. And then they said, okay, then we'll do that. Well, we ended up taking an hour. Because all of a sudden, what they saw was a mirror reflection of what they actually look like. And these now are the posters that are actually inside the club. And we launched them during the graduation. This one here, I'll always be there for you. This was a situation where the coach, where he only get to see his daughter on the weekend, his daughter Jasmine. And it was quite an emotional time, but then the statement was, I'll always be there for you. This one here with the guy, the little son saying, my dad, my hero. This one here was really funny. This is Shiona. He just come off playing for the senior club. He sat down and the photographer was taking a photo and he said, oh, you're going to take a photo? And he said, yeah. And he goes, oh, can I get all my kids? And he said, what do you mean? And he whistled, 7 kids come running around, And I won't say which ethnic group, but he was Tongan. But you saw the caption that they put on there, the most important team I play for. And I think when we think about heroes, we think about this gap between the people we see who are sporting stars in business and so forth. Part of the transformation and behaviour change is actually allowing people to say that they are the heroes. That locally you can transform a community, that your hero is actually the person who sits next to you, who you play with, who you work with, who you live with. When we start to transform that, like the little boy that looks up at his dad, he's my dad, but guess what? He's my hero.
Thank you very much, both of you. We'll see you again.
Thanks, Alfred.